The discovery. It was a quiet afternoon when Liam decided to finally start renovating the basement. The place had been ignored for years, filled with dust, cobwebs, and old furniture no one cared about anymore. Liam wasn't much of a handyman, but something about clearing out the clutter gave him a sense of purpose. He rolled up his sleeves, grabbed a crowbar, and got to work. The walls were old and cracked, showing their age. As Liam pried away at a wooden panel along the far wall, he noticed something strange. The panel was unusually heavy, and as it fell away, a metallic glint caught his eye. Behind the panel wasn't the usual concrete or brick he expected to see. Instead, there was a smooth silver surface, cold to the touch. It felt out of place, like it didn't belong in the old house. "What is this?" Liam muttered to himself, curiosity sparking in his mind. He brushed away the dirt and debris, revealing what looked like a large metallic shell embedded in the wall. It was oval-shaped, about 6 feet tall, with faint lines running across its surface. The lines glowed faintly, pulsing with a soft blue light that seemed to respond to his presence. It wasn't just a strange object. It was something alive, or at least functioning. Liam's heart began to race. He had seen enough movies to know this wasn't normal. He thought about calling someone, maybe the police or a scientist. But then, who would believe him? Instead, his curiosity won. He reached out and tapped the surface. The pod responded with a low hum, and the glowing lines brightened. Suddenly, the hum turned into a series of rhythmic beats. The sound grew louder, echoing through the basement. Liam stepped back, his pulse quickening. The air around the pod grew colder, and a thin layer of frost began to spread across the surface. For a moment, he thought he might have activated some kind of alarm. Then it happened. The pod hissed, and a seam appeared down its center. Steam escaped as the seam widened, and the front of the pod slowly slid open. Liam froze, his body torn between running and staying to see what was inside. He felt like he was in a dream, one he couldn't wake up from even if he wanted to. Inside the pod lay a figure, curled up and unmoving. It was a woman, or at least she looked like one. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her hair was a shimmering silver that reflected the dim light of the basement. She wore a suit made of some kind of material Liam couldn't identify, sleek and futuristic. Strange symbols glowed faintly on her arms, almost like tattoos, but they moved, shifting patterns like they were alive. Liam's breath caught in his throat. She wasn't human. She couldn't be. He hesitated before stepping closer, his hands trembling. "Hey, can you hear me?" he whispered, though he wasn't sure why he expected an answer. The woman didn't move. Her eyes remained closed, and her chest rose and fell slowly, indicating she was alive but unconscious. Liam knelt beside the pod, unsure of what to do. He noticed wires and tubes connected to her suit, all leading back into the walls of the pod. The technology was far beyond anything he had ever seen. "What are you doing in my basement?" he asked softly, as if talking to her would somehow make sense of the situation. Before he could process anything further, the pod emitted a sharp, high-pitched sound. Liam winced, covering his ears. The lights in the basement flickered, and the air felt heavier, almost charged with electricity. Something was happening, and it wasn't good. A sudden banging sound upstairs made Liam jump. It wasn't just the sound of something falling. It was deliberate, heavy, and getting closer. Someone, or something, was in the house. Liam's mind raced. Was it connected to the pod? Were they here for her? Panic set in, but he forced himself to think clearly. He needed to hide her, or at least figure out what was going on. He looked back at the alien woman. She was still unconscious, oblivious to the danger that was creeping closer. The banging grew louder. Whoever, or whatever, was upstairs was now at the top of the basement stairs. Liam had seconds to decide what to do. Without thinking, he grabbed a nearby tarp and threw it over the pod, trying to hide it from view. He crouched behind a stack of old boxes, heart pounding in his chest. The basement door creaked open, and heavy footsteps echoed down the stairs. Liam held his breath, gripping a rusted wrench he found on the floor. He wasn't sure if he could fight, but he was ready to try. As the footsteps drew closer, he peeked out from his hiding spot. The shadow of the intruder stretched across the room, long and menacing. It wasn't human. The figure moved with an unnatural grace, its glowing red eyes scanning the basement. Liam's grip tightened on the wrench, his mind racing. The alien woman stirred slightly, a soft gasp escaping her lips. The sound was faint, but loud enough for the intruder to hear. Its head snapped toward the pod, and Liam knew he was out of time. First contact. Liam's hands trembled as he tightened his grip on the rusted wrench. The shadow of the intruder loomed larger, its footsteps deliberate and unnervingly precise. Whatever it wasn't human. Its outline seemed almost mechanical. Joints that moved too smoothly, a head that swiveled unnaturally, as if scanning its surroundings. He couldn't let it find her. The strange alien woman in the pod, still unconscious, seemed to be the focus of this terrifying entity's search. He didn't understand why, but every instinct in him screamed that she was in danger, and so was he. The intruder's red, glowing eyes locked onto the tarp-covered pod. It tilted its head, emitting a low mechanical hum. Liam's heart pounded. He had to act. Gripping the wrench tightly, he threw a small metal can across the basement. It clanged loudly against the concrete floor, rolling into the shadows. The intruder's head snapped toward the sound, its mechanical body shifting with unsettling precision. For a moment, it hesitated, and Liam seized the opportunity. He darted from his hiding spot, grabbing the tarp and yanking it over himself and the pod. His mind raced as he whispered desperately to the unconscious alien, "Wake up. Please, wake up." The intruder's footsteps resumed, slow and deliberate, as it moved toward the sound of the can. Liam could hear a faint clicking noise, like tiny claws or tools extending from its limbs. The sound sent shivers down his spine. He didn't dare peek out, afraid that even the slightest movement might give away their location. Then the pod beneath him began to hum softly. Liam froze, his breath caught in his throat. The glowing lines on the pod's surface reappeared, brighter now, pulsing like a heartbeat. The alien woman stirred, her fingers twitching as if trying to grasp something. A faint, musical tone emanated from her lips, a language Liam couldn't begin to understand. The intruder stopped. The clicking noise grew louder, more erratic, as if it had detected the activity. Liam felt a wave of cold dread wash over him. He didn't know what the pod was doing, but whatever it was drawing the intruder closer. The woman's eyes suddenly flew open, revealing irises that shimmered like molten silver. She gasped, sitting upright in the pod, her movements sluggish but deliberate. Her gaze locked onto Liam, confusion and fear evident in her expression. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice soft and melodic, but strained, as if speaking was a struggle. Liam opened his mouth to answer, but the intruder's footsteps cut him off. It was now standing just feet away, its head swiveling toward the glowing pod. Liam could see it clearly now, a humanoid figure made entirely of sleek, black metal, its body covered in sharp edges and glowing red lines. Its hands ended in long, claw-like appendages, and its chest bore an emblem of unfamiliar symbols. The alien woman saw the intruder too. Her eyes widened, and she instinctively reached out, grabbing Liam's wrist with surprising strength. "Hide," she whispered urgently. Her other hand moved to the edge of the pod, and a small device extended from her suit. With a flick of her wrist, a translucent shield of energy surrounded the pod and the two of them. The intruder emitted a sharp, piercing sound, almost like a scream. It lunged forward, its claws striking the shield with a deafening clang. The force of the impact sent vibrations through the floor, but the shield held. The woman winced, clearly weakened, but she focused her energy on maintaining the barrier. "What is that thing?" Liam asked, his voice shaking. "Hunter," she replied, her tone grim. "It's here for me. It won't stop until I'm dead." Liam's heart sank. "What do we do? I don't think your shield can hold forever." She looked at him, her expression both determined and desperate. "You're human. Can you fight?" Liam almost laughed, though there was nothing funny about the situation. "I'm just a guy with a wrench. What do you think?" The shield flickered slightly as the hunter struck again, its claws glowing red-hot as they dug into the barrier. The woman gritted her teeth, sweat beading on her forehead. "If we don't move, it will break through. Can you run?" "Running, I can do," Liam said, glancing toward the basement's storm drain, the only other exit. He quickly explained the way out. The woman nodded, her shimmering eyes darting toward the hunter. "On my mark," she said. "I'll distract it. You lead the way." Liam hesitated. "What? You're barely awake. You can't." "I don't have a choice," she interrupted, her voice firm. "If we stay, we die." Before he could argue further, she lowered the shield and sprang to her feet. Despite her fragile appearance, she moved with surprising agility, darting toward the hunter. She raised her hand, and a burst of energy shot from her palm, striking the machine and sending it staggering backward. "Go," she shouted. Liam didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed the wrench and bolted for the storm drain, the woman close behind. The hunter recovered quickly, letting out another metallic scream as it pursued them. They scrambled through the narrow tunnel, the sound of metal claws scraping against concrete echoing behind them. Liam's lungs burned as he pushed himself forward, adrenaline fueling his every step. The woman followed closely, her breathing labored but steady. When they finally emerged into the open air, Liam collapsed onto the grass, gasping for breath. The woman knelt beside him, her gaze scanning the horizon. "We're not safe yet," she said, her voice heavy with exhaustion. "More will come." Liam looked at her, his mind racing with questions. Who was she? Why was she here? And what had he just gotten himself into? For now, he had no answers, only the growing realization that his life would never be the same. The pursuit begins. The night air was cold and biting as Liam and the alien woman emerged from the storm drain into the dense woods behind his house. The faint hum of machinery and the distant glow of red lights told him the hunter wasn't far behind. His heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't dare stop moving. The woman stumbled slightly, catching herself against a tree. Liam turned back to her, noticing how pale she looked under the faint moonlight. Whatever energy she had used to fight off the hunter had taken a toll on her. "We can't stop," Liam whispered urgently. "It's still coming." "I know," she said, her voice strained. "But I need a moment." Her silver eyes darted to the forest around them, scanning for any sign of movement. They never work alone. If one was here, more will follow. Liam froze. More? How many are we talking about? "Enough," she replied grimly. "They won't stop until they retrieve me, or destroy me." Liam took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. He didn't know how he'd ended up in this nightmare, but he wasn't about to let her face it alone. "Okay, what do we do? You seem to know these things better than I do." The woman hesitated, her gaze softening slightly as she looked at him. "You've already done more than I could have expected. Most would have run by now." "Yeah, well, I guess I'm not most people," Liam said, managing a nervous smile. "Now, come on. Let's figure out how to get out of this." She nodded, and they pressed on, weaving through the trees. The glow of the hunter's red eyes faded behind them. But the tension didn't. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves made Liam's nerves spike. The woods felt alive, but not in a comforting way. It felt like they were being washed. After what felt like hours, they came upon a small clearing. In the middle of it was an old, abandoned cabin. The roof sagged, and the windows were broken, but it was shelter and, more importantly, a place to regroup. Liam gestured toward it. That's our best bet for now. Let's get inside before they find us. The woman hesitated, her shimmering eyes scanning the building. It's risky. If they locate us, we'll be trapped. We don't have many options, Liam said. You need to rest, and we need a plan. She nodded reluctantly, and they made their way into the cabin. Inside, it smelled of damp wood and decay. Liam found an old lantern, and to his surprise, it still worked when he lit it. The dim glow illuminated the cramped space, revealing a single table, a few chairs, and a worn-out couch. The woman sat down heavily on the couch, leaning back as she closed her eyes. Liam grabbed a blanket from a nearby shelf, shaking off the dust before draping it over her. "Thanks," she murmured, her voice barely audible. Liam sat down across from her, his mind racing with questions. He didn't know where to start, but he had to try. "Okay, so, what's your name? Or what should I call you?" She opened her eyes and looked at him for a long moment before answering. "My name is Kelara. I come from a world far from here. One you wouldn't know." "Kelara," Liam repeated, nodding. "All right. And these hunters, what are they? Why are they after you?" Kelara hesitated, her gaze distant, as if she were reliving a painful memory. "They're machines, built by an empire that seeks control of the galaxy. My people, we resisted them, fought back. But we were no match for their numbers or their technology. They destroyed my world." Her voice broke slightly, but she continued. "I was one of the last survivors. They built this pod to keep me hidden, to preserve our knowledge and history. But somehow, they found me." Liam felt a pang of sympathy as he listened. "So they want to capture you because of what you know?" "Not just that," Kelara said, her expression darkening. "I carry something inside me, a key of sorts. It's a fragment of ancient technology my people discovered. It has the power to end their empire, or destroy everything if it falls into the wrong hands." Liam's stomach sank. "And now it's on Earth." "Great." Kelara nodded. "I never wanted this, but now that it's here, I have to protect it." Before Liam could respond, a distant, mechanical screech pierced the night air. He bolted upright, his heart racing. Kelara's eyes widened, and she quickly stood, her energy seemingly renewed by the threat. "They found us," she said. "We need to move." Liam grabbed the lantern and turned toward the door, but Kelara stopped him. "Wait. They'll expect us to run. We need to fight." "Fight," Liam repeated, incredulous. "With what? I've got a wrench, and you're barely standing." Kelara stepped toward him, placing her hand on his shoulder. "I have more strength than you think, and you're braver than you know." Liam wanted to argue, but the determination in her voice left no room for doubt. She raised her hand, and a faint glow surrounded her palm. From her suit, a small device emerged, projecting a holographic map of the area. "There's a clearing just beyond these woods," she said. "If we can reach it, I can send a signal to disrupt their systems, but it will only last a few minutes." "And then what?" Liam asked. "Then we run," Kelara said simply. "But first, we make sure they don't follow." Liam nodded, gripping his wrench like it was a sword. "All right, let's do this." As the sound of the hunters grew louder, Liam and Kelara prepared themselves. The night was far from over, and the fight for survival had only just begun. Unlikely allies, the forest was eerily silent, save for the occasional snap of twigs underfoot and the distant mechanical whirring of the hunters. Liam and Kelara moved quickly but cautiously, weaving through the thick trees. Kelara's map projection hovered just above her hand, its faint glow illuminating the path ahead. "We're close," she whispered. "A few miles north. There's a contact, a human who might help us." Liam nearly tripped over a root. "Wait, a contact. Who are they, and how do you know them?" Kelara glanced at him, her silver eyes unreadable. I've been monitoring Earth for years, even while in stasis. Certain individuals caught my attention, those who question their own government, who study what others dismiss as conspiracy. One of them has been tracking signals like mine. He might be useful. Useful, Liam muttered, shaking his head. Great. We're putting our lives in the hands of a conspiracy nut. Kalara arched an eyebrow. You're following an alien fugitive with a glowing pod. Perhaps you should reconsider your definition of nut. Despite the gravity of the situation, Liam chuckled under his breath. Fair point. The contact. After hours of trekking through the dense woods, they emerged onto an overgrown dirt road. At its end stood a small, run-down shack. The windows were boarded up, and satellite dishes jutted out from the roof like alien antennae. Rusted "Keep Out" signs surrounded the perimeter, alongside a hand-painted message, Government Surveillance Zone. Enter at your own risk. This is your guy? Liam asked, staring at the shack. Looks cozy. Kalara ignored his sarcasm, walking up to the door and knocking firmly. The sound echoed unnaturally, like metal hitting wood. Liam shifted uneasily, his eyes scanning the trees. He couldn't shake the feeling they were being watched. After a long pause, the door creaked open an inch, revealing a bloodshot eye peering out from the shadows. The voice behind it was raspy and suspicious. Who the hell are you? Kalara stepped forward. My name is Kalara. I'm not from here. You've been tracking me. The door slammed shut. Liam blinked in disbelief. Well, that went well. Kalara didn't flinch. She reached into her suit, pulling out a small circular device. It emitted a soft hum as she pressed it against the doorframe. The sound of heavy locks disengaging echoed from inside, and the door creaked open again, this time fully. The man who stepped out was wiry, with unkempt hair and a beard that looked like it hadn't been trimmed in months. He wore a patched-up jacket, and his eyes darted nervously between Kalara and Liam. You're her, he whispered, his tone shifting from suspicion to awe. The signal, the patterns. You're real. Yes, Kalara said, her voice calm but firm. And we need your help. The safe house. Inside, the shack was a chaotic mess of monitors, wires, and half-eaten food. Screens displayed maps, radio frequencies, and what appeared to be thermal scans of the surrounding area. Liam noted the stacks of conspiracy books and handwritten notes covering every surface. Name's Vince, the man said, gesturing toward a chair. Sit if you can find a spot. So what brings an alien and He glanced at Liam. Whatever you are, to my humble abode. Hunters, Kalara replied bluntly. Machines. They're tracking me, and they won't stop until I'm dead. Vince's face paled. Hunters, as in galactic death machines hunters. And you led them here. Liam raised his hands defensively. Hey, we didn't have much of a choice. Also, you didn't have to open the door. Vince shot him a glare, but didn't argue. Instead, he turned back to Kalara. All right, what do you need? Kalara pointed to one of his monitors. Your equipment. I need to access the satellite array you've been using. I can send a signal to disable their tracking temporarily. Vince scratched his head. That's not exactly easy. The government's been sniffing around my setup for months. If I boost the signal like that, they'll trace it here. Then we don't have much time, Kalara said, already moving toward the equipment. Preparing for battle. While Kalara worked, Vince rummaged through a pile of junk and pulled out a dusty rifle. He handed it to Liam, who looked at it skeptically. You ever used one of these? Vince asked. Not really, Liam admitted, holding it awkwardly. Well, you're about to learn, Vince said. If those hunters show up, we're gonna need every bit of firepower we've got. Kalara's voice cut through their conversation. They're already close. Liam and Vince turned to see her staring at one of the monitors. A red blip was moving steadily toward their location, accompanied by several smaller ones. They've deployed drones, Kalara said, her tone grim. We need to act now. What about the signal? Vince asked. I can't finish it before they arrive, Kaylura admitted. We'll have to hold them off long enough. Liam swallowed hard. Hold them off. With what? A rifle and a wrench. Kaylura turned to him, her expression calm but determined. I'll do what I can to disable their systems. You just need to buy me time. The attack. The first drone appeared minutes later, hovering outside the shack. It emitted a shrill, high-pitched sound before firing a burst of red energy that exploded against the wall. Liam dove for cover as debris rained down around him. Vince fired his rifle, the shot connecting with the drone and sending it crashing to the ground. One down, he shouted. Kaylura stood in the center of the room, her hands glowing as she worked to amplify the signal. Her voice was steady but urgent. Keep them off me. More drones appeared, their glowing red eyes piercing the darkness. Liam ducked behind a pile of equipment, firing wildly with the rifle. He wasn't a great shot, but the chaos kept the drones at bay. Vince, meanwhile, moved with surprising precision, taking out 2 more drones with well-placed shots. They're gonna send the big ones next, he warned. As if on cue, the ground trembled, and the familiar screech of a hunter echoed through the trees. Liam's stomach dropped as the massive machine emerged, its red eyes scanning the shack. Kaylura's voice rang out. I need 30 more seconds. Liam gritted his teeth, stepping out from cover. We don't have 30 seconds. He fired at the hunter, the bullets bouncing harmlessly off its metallic body. The machine turned toward him, its claws glowing as it prepared to strike. Before it could, Kaylura unleashed a burst of energy, her signal device flaring brightly. The hunter froze mid-stride, its limbs twitching as if struggling to regain control. It's done, Kaylura shouted. Let's go. Without waiting, Liam grabbed her arm and bolted for the back door, Vince close behind. The hunter's systems rebooted quickly, but it was too late. They were already gone, disappearing into the night. A temporary victory. They stopped a few miles down the road, breathless but alive. Vince leaned against a tree, clutching his rifle. That was insane. Kaylura nodded, her expression somber. It's only going to get worse. Liam looked at her, his chest still heaving. What now? Kaylura's gaze was distant, but her voice was steady. We keep moving. This was just the beginning. Technology and truths. The abandoned warehouse was quiet, its towering walls stretching high into the shadows above. Liam, Kaylura, and Vince had slipped inside just before dawn, exhausted but alive. The air smelled of rust and decay, but it was a temporary haven from the relentless pursuit of the hunters. Sunlight filtered weakly through broken windows, casting fractured patterns on the dusty floor. Kaylura sat cross-legged on a large metal crate, her silver eyes fixed on a holographic map projected from her wrist. Vince tinkered with his rifle in the corner, muttering about needing better firepower. Liam leaned against a pillar, catching his breath and trying to process everything. So, Liam began, breaking the silence. We've been running all night, barely survived getting here, and we still don't know what the plan is. Care to fill us in, Kaylura? Kaylura didn't look up, her fingers gliding over the holographic interface. I'm analyzing their tracking patterns. We disrupted their systems temporarily, but it won't last. The hunters will recalibrate soon. And then we're back to square one, Vince muttered, glancing over. Great. Kaylura finally looked up, her expression calm but firm. Not entirely. The disruption gave me access to their network. I was able to extract some data. Liam raised an eyebrow. What kind of data? She hesitated, her gaze flickering to the hologram. Coordinates. A base of operations on Earth, likely a staging point for their activities here. Vince straightened, his interest piqued. You're saying these things have an HQ on our planet? Kaylura nodded. It appears so. If we can infiltrate it, we might have a chance to disable their tracking permanently. Liam frowned. That's a big if. Do we even know what we're walking into? And how do we take on a base full of these things? Kaylura's lips pressed into a thin line. I don't have all the answers yet, but we can't stay on the run forever. If we don't act, they'll find us and destroy anyone who gets in their way. The alien technology. Liam sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. All right, let's say we agree to this crazy plan. What do we have? Because right now, it feels like we're bringing a knife to a gunfight. Kaylura's expression softened slightly. We have more than you think. She reached into her suit, pulling out a small metallic device. It was no larger than a deck of cards, but it shimmered with an inner light, pulsing faintly. She placed it on the crate, and a complex series of symbols appeared in the air above it. This is a fragment of my people's technology, Kaylura explained. It's called an Arcanum core. It's one of the few things I managed to bring with me. Vince leaned closer, his eyes wide. What does it do? It's a multi-purpose tool, Kaylura said. With it, I can manipulate energy, hack into their systems, and even create temporary shields. But, she hesitated. It's limited. The energy it uses comes from me. Liam's brow furrowed. You mean it drains you? She nodded. Every time I use it, it takes a toll. That's why I collapsed earlier. I have to be careful. Vince whistled low. So it's powerful, but it comes with a cost. Exactly, Kaylura said. But with your help, I can amplify its range. Your equipment, crude as it may be, could act as a relay. Vince bristled slightly at the insult to his tech, but nodded. All right, I'll bite. What do you need me to do? Kaylura gestured to his satchel of tools. I'll guide you. Together, we can create a field device capable of disrupting the hunters' communications. It won't destroy them, but it will buy us time. The plan forms. As Vince and Kaylura worked, Liam paced the room, feeling increasingly out of his depth. He'd never been the hero type. He was just a regular guy who had stumbled into something far bigger than himself. And yet, every time he looked at Kaylura, her determination, her quiet strength, he felt a pull to keep going. Finally, he spoke up. All right, so we disrupt their communications. Then what? Are we just going to march into their base and hope for the best? Kaylura glanced at him, her expression serious. Not exactly. If we can infiltrate their base, I can access their mainframe. With the data stored there, I could potentially find a way to eliminate their presence on Earth entirely. And if it doesn't work? Liam asked. Kaylura's silence was answer enough. Vince snorted. Well, that's comforting. The truth about the key. As they continued preparing, Liam couldn't shake a nagging thought. He finally turned to Kaylura. You said earlier that you're carrying something inside you. A key. What exactly is it? Kaylura hesitated, her gaze dropping to the Arcanum core. It's not just a key. It's a piece of ancient technology, older than my people, older than the hunters. We found it buried deep beneath the surface of my world. What does it do? Liam pressed. Kaylura's voice grew quiet. It's a control device. It can override the systems of the hunters, shutting them down permanently. But it's also dangerous. In the wrong hands, it could destroy everything. Liam stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. So, that's why they're after you. Yes, Kaylura said. If they capture me, they'll use the key to consolidate their power. The galaxy would fall under their complete control. Vince let out a low whistle. No pressure, ha. The calm before the storm. As night fell, the group sat in tense silence, the hum of Kaylura's technology filling the air. Vince had finished modifying the equipment, and Kaylura had calibrated the Arcanum core. They were as ready as they could be. Liam leaned against the wall, staring out at the darkness beyond the warehouse. He knew the hunters would come, and when they did, it would be a fight for survival. Kaylura joined him, her expression softer than before. You don't have to do this, Liam. He turned to her, surprised. What are you talking about? You could leave, she said quietly. Disappear. Live your life. You've already done more than I could have asked. Liam shook his head. And what? Let you face this alone? Not a chance. Her silver eyes searched his face, and for the first time, she smiled. A small, fleeting smile, but genuine. Thank you. Liam shrugged, trying to lighten the mood. Don't thank me yet. We haven't won. Kaylura's gaze hardened, determination returning to her features. We will. In the distance, the faint sound of mechanical whirring began to grow louder. The hunters were coming. The final stand. The warehouse was eerily quiet, its shadowed corners hiding the tension that crackled in the air. The faint hum of Kaylura's modified Arcanum core echoed softly, its glow pulsating like a heartbeat. Vince paced nervously, his modified rifle in hand, while Liam sat cross-legged on the floor, gripping the wrench he refused to let go of. The calm before the storm was suffocating. Kaylura stood at the center of the room, her silver eyes fixed on the glowing holographic map she had projected from her wrist. Red dots, symbols of the approaching hunters, closed in from all directions. They found us, she said softly, her voice steady despite the tension in her shoulders. The drones are sweeping the perimeter. The main hunter unit will arrive in minutes. Liam swallowed hard, his throat dry. What's the plan? Because I'm pretty sure a wrench and some duct tape won't cut it against an army of killer robots. Kaylura's lips curved into a faint, humorless smile. We don't need to defeat them all. Just delay them long enough for me to disrupt their communications and trigger the device. Vince snorted. Delay. That's a fancy way of saying suicidal standoff. Kaylura turned to him, her expression serious. If we don't act now, there won't be a later. This is our best chance to stop them. Preparing for battle, the group hurried to set traps and fortify the warehouse. Vince rigged old propane tanks into makeshift explosives, carefully placing them near the entrances. Liam stacked crates and metal sheets to create crude barricades, sweat dripping down his face as he worked. Kaylura stood near the center of the room, her Arcanum core glowing brighter as she calibrated its energy output. Liam, she called, her voice cutting through the tense silence. He looked up to see her holding a small disc-shaped device. Take this. It's a pulse grenade. It will temporarily disable anything electronic within a 5-meter radius. Liam took it hesitantly. You're trusting me with this. She nodded. You've proven yourself more than capable. Just don't drop it. Liam chuckled nervously. Right. No pressure. Vince finished his last rig and joined them, slinging his rifle over his shoulder. All right, everything's set. If they come through the main entrance, they're in for a nasty surprise. Kaylura glanced at the map again. They won't just come through the entrance. The drones will breach the windows, and the hunters will try to force us into a corner. We need to stay mobile. Great, Vince muttered. I love a good game of cat and mouse with death machines. The attack begins. The first strike came without warning. A high-pitched screech split the air as a drone smashed through one of the upper windows, its glowing red eyes scanning the room. Before it could fire, Vince raised his rifle and took it out with a single shot. The drone exploded in a shower of sparks, its remains crashing to the floor. Here we go, Vince shouted, adrenaline surging through him. More drones followed, pouring in from every opening like an unstoppable tide. Liam ducked behind a barricade as a burst of red energy scorched the air above his head. He gripped the wrench tightly, his pulse pounding in his ears. Kaylura stood in the middle of the chaos, calm and focused. Her hands moved swiftly over her holographic interface, channeling energy from the Arcanum core into the modified relay Vince had built. I need more time, she called out. Liam peeked over the barricade, spotting a drone hovering near Kaylura. Without thinking, he charged forward, swinging his wrench with all his strength. The impact sent the drone crashing to the ground, its circuitry sparking. Nice, Vince shouted, covering him with rifle fire. The ground trembled suddenly, and a loud metallic screech announced the arrival of the main hunter unit. The massive machine stepped into the warehouse, its clawed feet crunching over debris. It stood nearly 8 feet tall, its black metallic body gleaming in the dim light, its red eyes locked onto Kelara. "Protect her," Liam shouted, positioning himself between the hunter and Kelara. The hunter lunged forward, its claws glowing with energy. Vince fired at its head, but the bullets ricocheted harmlessly off its armor. "We're gonna need something bigger," he yelled. "Kelara's gambit." Kelara's voice cut through the chaos. "The relay is almost ready. Just hold them off for a little longer." Liam dodged another swipe from the hunter, narrowly avoiding its deadly claws. He remembered the pulse grenade in his pocket and quickly fished it out. With shaking hands, he activated it and hurled it at the hunter. The device detonated with a burst of blue light, and the hunter froze, its limbs twitching as its systems temporarily shut down. "Now's your chance," Kelara shouted. Vince didn't hesitate. He fired at the exposed circuitry on the hunter's chest, the bullets piercing through. Sparks erupted from the machine, and it collapsed in a heap of smoking metal. Before they could celebrate, more drones swarmed into the warehouse. Kelara's hands moved faster, her face etched with concentration. "It's ready," she yelled. "Get down." Liam and Vince dove for cover as Kelara unleashed a massive wave of energy from the Arcanum core. The blue pulse rippled through the room, disabling every drone and hunter in its path. The machines froze mid-motion, their lights flickering and dying. The warehouse fell silent, the only sound Kelara's labored breathing as she collapsed to her knees. The aftermath. Liam rushed to her side, helping her up. "Kelara, are you okay?" She nodded weakly. "I'm fine. The disruption worked. Their systems are offline. For now." Vince looked around at the lifeless machines, his rifle still at the ready. That was one hell of a fireworks show. But how long do we have before they reboot? Kelara's expression darkened. "Not long. This was only a temporary victory. We need to move before reinforcements arrive." Liam helped Kelara to her feet, his mind racing. "So, what now? Do we head for their base?" Kelara nodded, her silver eyes glowing faintly. "Yes, it's our only chance to end this. For good." As the trio stepped out of the warehouse, the sun began to rise, casting a golden light over the ruins of their battlefield. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, they had hope. Resolution and new beginnings. The journey to the hunter's base was a race against time. The trio moved through dense forests, abandoned roads, and crumbling ruins under the cover of darkness. Staying just ahead of the reinforcements, Kelara assured them were coming. The Arcanum core, now dim, rested in her palm like a dormant heart. Its energy was nearly depleted, leaving her visibly drained but determined. Liam walked beside her, his wrench strapped to his belt like a badge of courage. Vince led the way, scanning their surroundings with his rifle in hand, his sharp eyes catching every flicker of movement. "How close are we?" Liam asked, his voice low but tense. Kelara raised her wrist, activating a faint holographic display. A glowing red marker pulsed on the map, just a few miles ahead. "Close. The base is hidden underground. It's shielded, but with the core, I can force my way in." Vince glanced back at her. "And once we're in, what's the plan? Because I'm guessing they won't roll out the welcome mat." Kelara's eyes flickered with resolve. "We get to the mainframe. From there, I can deploy a command override using the key I carry. It will dismantle their systems on Earth, and potentially across the galaxy." "Potentially?" Liam asked, his brow furrowing. "What happens if it doesn't work?" Kelara hesitated. "If it fails, the hunters will know exactly where we are. We won't survive their retaliation." Liam exchanged a glance with Vince, who shrugged. "Well," Vince said, "I didn't come this far to quit now." The hidden fortress. They arrived at the base just before dawn. The entrance was concealed beneath an overgrown hill, marked only by faint seams in the earth and a single metallic panel embedded in the ground. Kaylara knelt beside the panel, placing the Arcanum core against it. The device flared to life, and the ground trembled as the hidden doors slid open, revealing a narrow, dimly lit tunnel. "Welcome to hell," Vince muttered, gripping his rifle tighter. The tunnel stretched deep into the earth, its metallic walls lined with glowing red conduits that pulsed rhythmically. The air was thick with a low hum, the sound of machinery and power coursing through the base. Kaylara led the way, her steps steady despite her fatigue. "Stay close. If we're separated, we won't survive." As they moved deeper, the corridor opened into a massive underground chamber. Machines of alien design lined the walls, their surfaces covered in the same shifting symbols Kaylara carried on her skin. At the center of the room was the mainframe, a towering, cylindrical structure that pulsed with crimson light. It was guarded by two massive hunters, their sleek black forms standing motionless like statues. "Well, that's not intimidating," Liam whispered. Kaylara ignored the comment, stepping forward. "I'll need to connect directly to the mainframe." "Cover me." "Cover you," Vince said incredulously. "Those things will tear us apart the second we make a move." "They won't," Kaylara said, her voice calm. "Not at first. They'll wait for confirmation from the central AI before attacking. That's our window." "Small comfort," Vince muttered, raising his rifle. The final confrontation. Kaylara approached the mainframe, placing her hands on its surface. The Arcanum core extended thin tendrils of light, which burrowed into the machine. The room's hum grew louder, the crimson light intensifying as the core began its work. The hunters stirred, their heads swiveling toward Kaylara. Liam's grip on his wrench tightened as he stepped in front of her, his heart pounding. Vince took up a defensive position, aiming his rifle at the nearest hunter. The mainframe's voice boomed through the chamber, deep and mechanical. "Unauthorized access detected. Identify." Kaylara's voice was steady, though sweat beaded on her brow. "Kaylara of Enethria, final bearer of the override key." The light in the room shifted, the red glow turning to a cold, piercing white. The hunters stepped forward, their claws clicking ominously against the floor. "Override key identified," the mainframe intoned. "Surrender the key or face termination." Kaylara didn't flinch. Not today. With a sudden surge of energy, the Arcanum core flared brighter than ever. The mainframe's lights flickered, and the hunters froze, their systems disrupted. Kaylara's voice rose, filled with power, initiating command override. A desperate fight. The room erupted into chaos. The hunters fought through the disruption, their movements jerky but purposeful. One lunged toward Kaylara, but Liam threw himself in its path, swinging his wrench with all his might. The blow struck its head, leaving a dent but barely slowing it down. Vince fired, the bullets sparking off the hunter's armor. "We're not gonna hold them off forever," he shouted. Kaylara's focus didn't waver as she worked, her hands glowing with energy. The symbols on her skin pulsed in rhythm with the Arcanum core, the strain evident on her face. Just a little longer. The second hunter charged Vince, its claws slashing through the air. He dove out of the way, rolling to his feet and firing another round. The bullet struck an exposed joint, and the machine stumbled, sparks flying. Liam dodged another swipe, his wrench now a desperate shield. "Kaylara, hurry up." The key's power. Kaylara let out a cry as the Arcanum core reached its peak, its light flooding the chamber. The hunters froze mid-motion, their red eyes dimming as the override took hold. The mainframe's voice stuttered, then fell silent. "It's done," Kaylara said, her voice barely above a whisper. She collapsed to her knees, the core flickering weakly in her hands. Liam and Vince rushed to her side. "Are you okay?" Liam asked, his voice filled with concern. Kaylara nodded, though her movements were sluggish. "Their systems are shutting down. Earth is safe. For now." Vince glanced around the chamber, his rifle still raised. For now. What does that mean? Kaylura looked at him, her expression solemn. The override disrupted their operations here, but it won't stop them forever. The hunters are vast, and their reach extends beyond this planet. Liam helped her to her feet. Then what's next? A new beginning. Kaylura turned to the mainframe, now dark and lifeless. I have the data I need to strike at the heart of their empire. But I can't do it alone. Liam met her gaze, understanding what she was asking. You want us to come with you? You've proven yourselves capable, Kaylura said. This fight isn't just about my people. It's about all worlds, including yours. Vince let out a long sigh, slinging his rifle over his shoulder. Well, I always wanted to see the stars. Liam smiled, despite the weight of the moment. Count me in. Kaylura's lips curved into a small, grateful smile. Then let's begin. As they left the underground base, the first rays of dawn broke across the horizon. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, they weren't running. They were ready to take the fight to the stars. The journey had only just begun.